Hi, everyone. Welcome to Foresight's Existential Hope Group. I'm really, really, really happy to see so many of you here behind the scenes and then to have such a wonderful podcast guest here today. As usual, this is like a quite unusual podcast in the sense that Beatrice and I will be asking a few questions about what really drives the people that most inspire us to be work on positive futures. And then we also have the back room of our Existential Hope Group that is collaborating through the chat. And if we have time, we will take a few questions at the end. But for now, we will kick it off. And I'm really, really happy to have Creon here today. Um, it's very, very difficult to describe you, Creon, and to introduce you as a person. I think in a previous Foresight talk, I tried it by saying that whenever I face a difficult situation, I try to channel my inner Creon and then try to do whatever comes up. So I can't use that line anymore. So I have to find a different one. But I really want to say, like, first and foremost, and officially, really, you are like a super brilliant polymath. Is no other way to describe it. You're at home in space, in the sense that you're heading research at Planet Labs after a really wonderful career at NASA. And I should also say that as a Foresight Senior Fellow, you chair our Space Technology Group, which is a private Google group of researchers, entrepreneurs, and funders that are interested in driving long-term progress in space, perhaps in channels, perhaps finding channels that and they could otherwise where they can talk about the types of ideas that they could not otherwise talk about. And I should also say that that's not your only forte. Your polymathiness, or whatever you want to describe this, really shines through in any of our technical tracks, which you join most of them off, from longevity to molecular machines. You're always, I think, there with like a really, I think, interesting, inspiring comment. And plus, you gave a wonderful talk yourself on immunology. So for those of you who are listening to this on YouTube or to our podcast, check out Creon's immunology talk. It has some really, really wonderful slides in there and is much loved and garnered you a big following. And finally, I should really say that beyond your wonderful and outspoken mind, you also have a really big heart and are a dear, dear friend to many people within Foresight, really. And most importantly, I think when we listen to your ideas and when you share, like, it's very difficult not to get extremely excited about the future. And so you're really a great incarnation of existential hope. So really, really happy to have you on for many, many reasons today. But we will dive right into the questions. And maybe just to bring those up to speed who may not already be familiar with your work. Perhaps,
Wait, Allison, before we dive in, I wanted to say one more thing about the space group, which is encouraging anyone in the audience here who's interested in the intersection of space, science and technology and policy and foresight to ping you or Phenon to get in on that group because we're welcome additional people.
Wonderful. That's a great first plug. And I think that's a good segue also into our first question, which is just in general, like, what are you currently working on? And like, pick people that may not immediately be familiar with your career or a space career in general up a little bit about like what got you started. Like, you have such a fantastic history. And yeah, I think it would be wonderful for new people in the space to learn a little bit like, how does one get started on such a career? What got you inspired? What got you
Well,
on?
I had a lot of great luck, but I think that is available to most people if they pay attention. Or as Richard Miller said, you have good luck and then you have to jump on it. Like when a lucky event happens, you have to like just push. And anyway, I studied math and computer science at school, and then I had this great lucky break where NASA came interviewing for jobs at my school, and I thought, well, I'm going to finish my graduate studies, but why not have a test interview with NASA? And I had this fantastic interview where I just knew all this stuff that they were looking for. So they offered me a job, and I came to California, and I just kind of fell in love with the Silicon Valley at the time. This was in the '80s, and I dropped out of grad school and came to work at NASA. And first, I worked on computer stuff, and then later on, I got into data visualization, which was also kind of coding. And then I got into computational physics and really learned a lot more math and physics and started writing codes with some of the computational physicists at NASA, investigating fluid dynamics, flow systems for airplanes and rockets, what's going on, and with the aerodynamics and the combustion. And then that got me into molecular physics and quantum chemistry. And I did a lot of quantum chemistry simulations. And then I eventually got into the classic space mission design. So trajectories and eventually communications and optics, power. And did work on like actual space missions at NASA and launch systems. And then some friends of mine at NASA started this company called Planet Labs in the garage, in their garage in Cupertino at this community house that we all lived in. And then eventually I left NASA after 32 years and joined Planet Labs about 2 years after it started, where now I have this fancy title of chief technologist and director of R&D. But really what it means is I kind of try to see what might help us in the future technologically and come up with new ideas for new types of instruments and missions. And then hardly anybody officially reports to me, but I sort of have this attitude that the whole company reports to me. If I can convince them that my ideas are good, they will work on them. And they'll work on them not because, I'm their manager, but because they actually are enthusiastic. So that's where I've been at for the last few years. And it's been wonderful to work with my friends on projects that are meaningful.
Yeah, aiming to that. Working with your friends on meaningful projects. I think that's it's a good sign. I think when the line between like your organization and your friend group is like extremely blurry. All right, wonderful. You already tackled a few of these individual areas, I think. And yeah, you've definitely had like, I think a really rich, travel through all of them, but maybe to just bring someone new up to speed who may be entering the space, like if you could give a bird's eye view of what that space even looks like what does it entail to work in the space industry, or how could one even think about that entire space?
Well, the space industry is fairly broad these days and getting bigger. As you know, there's a lot of activity that's geared up over the last 10 years, particularly maybe the last 5. And so there's like, I won't say there's room for everybody, but there's room for all sorts of people with different expertise, from physics and math to engineering, just all the disciplines, electrical, mechanical, thermal, software, as well as life sciences people and economics people and business people. And in our case of our company, even salespeople, because we basically sell data. Our satellites produce image data of the world, and then we try and convince various customers that it's worth their money. And so, um, you know, one thing I will say about the space business is that a lot of people who wind up in it, possibly a significant majority, they're sort of like space enthusiasts. And so they direct themselves into it and they figure out a way that they can contribute. It's almost kind of like a cult. Like, people are like, space is the answer. And and then they just go into this field because they are whatever passion, science fiction or inspiration as a young person, there's stars in their eyes. And so we get a lot of really devoted people. And in general, that's a very good thing. In practice, I tend to now in my later years be like, okay, let's calm down here and be more reasonable and not just be like enthusiastic about space for its own sake. But I recognize the power of the inspiration and the and anyway, there's a lot of great people, really devoted, really wonderful, intelligent, hardworking, um, and interesting people in this business. And you can and I mean you can work for the government, you can work for private industry, you can work on your own startup. There's a lot of different ways to get into the game.
Okay, great. And what could someone like imagine the life of someone working in the space industry? Actually imagine to be like, I mean, like you've been at NASA and you're at Planet Labs now. Those are like very different roles. You haven't been at the government yet, I think.
No, no,
Um,
that's the government. I
yeah,
consider NASA the
yeah,
government.
okay.
Yeah.
But
So
like regulating the industry yet.
no, no, it's not my thing. So I mean, an everyday life for me is kind of like normal, right? I kind of equally uh, partition my time between studying and learning about relevant matters, doing like calculation and design and coding, mostly sort of small scale stuff to just test out ideas to the extent I can myself to see if they're any good. And then sort of the third partition of time is, meetings, calls, pitching stuff to my colleagues to see if they make sense, or reviewing stuff that they've done and telling them whether it seems to make sense. So, I mean, it's not that much different from any other sort of scientific or technical field in that regard.
Is there any example project that, I mean, it's not classified as something that you could speak about, like that worked
Well,
before?
we don't really do anything classified at Planet. Um, we have, proprietary stuff that we're not ready to reveal yet. But one example project that has been a great top of mind for me for several years now is this thing called Pelican, which we just announced, which is our next generation, very high resolution imaging satellites, which are sort of new kind of satellite, mostly because it flies very low. And so it has an advanced propulsion system that allows it to fly kind of down into the atmosphere and get really close and take high resolution pictures with a relatively smallish satellite compared to, and it's much less expensive than the competition that use larger satellites in higher orbits. And so that I've watched over the last few years that go from like my crazy idea and a few PowerPoint slides to this giant project now, which is like a major announcement of our company, and we're spending a lot of money on it. We're building these things. They're getting, the hardware's coming together. They're getting integrated. We booked launches for them. And so, assuming it works, this is going to be a very exciting year regarding that Pelican project. And if you look on Planet's website, I think you could find some like uh, marketing videos.
Oh, very exciting. Um, okay, wonderful. In general, if you look back not only at your own career, but like perhaps a little bit more back at like the field in general, and since you've been in it, have there been any exciting shifts or any like cultural paradigms or something that, you know, had returned? Like, were there any like notable developments that like significantly like expanded people's just paradigms of what's possible? Or like, yeah, how did
Oh,
how did the bean space evolve?
very much so. In the, let's say in the last 10 years, or roughly speaking, maybe a little longer, sort of the last few years I was at NASA, and then the last 7 or 8 years I've been at Planet, there's been huge change most people are aware of in the space industry. We've had the rise of this whole so-called new space industry, new companies building rockets and satellites and kind of using more, trying to maybe discard where appropriate some of the ultra conservative approaches that government missions were for a long time pretty much the only game in town, uh, were levying these requirements on themselves that were maybe not quite compatible with the more uh, iterative, fast-paced, um, risk uh, tolerant model, like the typical Silicon Valley model. So there's been that whole new space industry, which I roughly described right there. And of course, another thing that has really made a change, everywhere, but no less in aerospace and the space industry is that, ridiculous advances in computer power, and particularly for a given cost. Like computers are a million times better than they were when I started my career for the same cost. It's insane. Like my laptop is better than the best supercomputers that cost tens of millions of dollars that we used to work with at NASA. My laptop of today is way better every way. And so that's, hugely changed what you can do in terms of managing data and doing simulations and testing designs. And then also, of course, con- concurrently with that, or we've had the rise of the internet, which has just completely changed knowledge management and access to information and now collaboration. So I mean, this is not unique to the space industry, but it has had a huge effect on the space industry.
Aren't there some videos online on YouTube as well of like, I think we're using the early NASA computers for visualizations and yeah. Well, I encourage
And
people
some
to
of that
post.
stuff, some of it's pretty embarrassing at this point in time, but it's probably findable.
Well, at this point in time, but I think it only shows really how much progress actually occurred. And so
You know, yeah.
that's quite inspiring. Um, okay. Well, are there like, coming from that historical lens, are there like any specific areas that, you think are like maybe the next paradigm shift or areas that you currently find undervalued or where you just expect like if you, even either cultural or technological breakthroughs to occur in your space?
Well, in the last few years, I've been getting interested in a broader set of topics than just space or remote sensing by satellite. They're somewhat related, but I'm kind of more excited about some of these new synthesis areas. I mean, there's plenty of people who are focused on space and launch systems and satellites, and it's all wonderful, and I've been focused on it too. But more recently, I'm getting really inspired by natural systems, and particularly the sort of merging of advanced technology with natural systems. I think that particularly with looking at biology and ecology and sort of looking for the wisdom of nature and combining that with the technology that we have, rather than sort of a technology versus nature approach or a technology replacing nature approach, which I often hear people talking about. I mean, as you know, like one of the things is, people are concerned about carbon in the atmosphere. And so every tech bro or every tech bro has a, giant machine that they want to build and scale globally to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. And I'm like, hey, kid, hey guys, like we have the technology to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. Nature's been doing it for, hundreds of millions of years. It's called the soil, and it's called life. And all we need to do is look at that and um, and nurture it. And we can sequester as much carbon as we want, and also you know enhance biodiversity, and really the natural systems are the miraculous ones. This is a similar thing, Allison, to what people see, like a lot of times in the nanotechnology and molecular machines field. It's like, oh, you want to get inspired about molecular machines? Look at life, because that is molecular machines that are so much more complex, advanced, and beautiful than anything we do, with a scanning probe microscope. And not to disrespect those who are taking a more hard engineering approach to it, but it's just that for me, uh, looking at nature and looking at life and looking at ecology is kind of the next frontier for technology, because it is the ultimate technology, by far the most advanced technology we know of in the universe. Um, and then I would say that another thing that is really exciting me recently, and this is again really not space, but it's just the idea that our outlook determines our future. And I know this is kind of the whole exo thing. It's like, if you spend all your time thinking about disasters and crises and dystopian futures, you're probably more likely to get one of those things than if you spend your time thinking about wonderful uh, aspects of the world and beauty and things that make you feel good, and futures that are that attract you rather than repel you. So I'm very interested in how our frame of reference and our thoughts and feelings determine what we collectively create. And I just think it's time, especially for the fortunate people who participate in these kinds of calls and these kinds of social groups. Very fortunate people, should like stop being afraid and stop being, you know, uh, pessimistic and worried about doing doom and gloom. I'm not saying we bury our heads in the sand and like ignore our problems. I'm just saying let's focus on what we want. Um, so yeah, those are some things that really excite me, and they're not particularly space technologies.
Yes, I think as I said in the introduction, that's only like, I think, really one of the many hats that you wear, at least at Foresight. And we get to a few maybe others in the Q&A afterwards. But I also just want to point people to, there's a talk from Jonathan Barnes, who was a Foresight Fellow and gave a really wonderful talk at our Molecular Machines conference a few years ago, entitled Artificial Molecular Machines. And he goes through nature and goes through nature and goes through nature and goes through nature. And then the tiny last bits, and they're like, and this is what we can do. And so I think it's really, really inspiring, really, to take a look and just to bear witness to all the fantastic things that nature can already do and learn from it. Okay, but you gave me too much of a good, I think, segue into the existential hope theme. We cannot let that slide. And so I'm super happy to give it over to Beatrice now to really dig into the more existential hope section of this podcast.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Creon, for coming. So this section will just have a few questions that are more like digging into the philosophical aspect of what you just talked about, and how our outlook determines our future. And so, yeah, what we're trying to do is just hearing from scientists like Creon how what he's working on right now can actually impact the future and what visions, you're having for the future, Creon. And I know you and Allison have been friends for a long time, and I'm always hearing about like all the crazy, amazing things that Creon has done. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting to hear if you have any crazy, amazing plans for the future as well. Um,
Well, there's this question that was, we shared the questions that you might ask in a document in advance, interest full transparency here. And the, there was this question about that it's hard for people to envision positive scenarios, and envisioning dystopian scenarios seems to be easier. Um, uh, and what can we do to change this? And so here's kind of what I have to say about that, which is that, again, we need to discuss what we want and what we want as individuals and what we want at a physical level and biological level and economically and societally and even cosmically. Like, what is it that we really uh, desire and what inspires us in a positive way? And we need to look inward at that stuff as well as outward. Now, I think dystopianism is easier. It's particularly easier to dramatize. Like, everyone complains about dystopian sci-fi and dystopian movies, and it's easy to dramatize because one might say that drama requires conflict. And so if you're going to make a dramatic piece like a novel or a film, you want conflict. And human versus nature conflict is kind of passé. Like, it's not considered very uh, it's not a really popular theme anymore. It used to be. Now we realize we have to partner with nature, at least intuitively. And so the conflict tends to be human versus human and good versus evil. And it's a formula. It's a simple formula for drama. But I think that actually, at least for me, like the best drama, even if it's kind of dystopian, like there is no good versus evil, black and white. Like, you find that all the characters have a mixture of each, and the hero has flaws, and what's the thing that's not the hero, the villain, if there is one, also has, a point. So I think that that's really interesting. And and also I think dystopian is easier to visualize because people are programmed heavily since childhood to be afraid and be fearful, and they're ruled by fear. So many people, so much of the time, even me, some of the time, less and less, I hope. And, and like modern media and social media, they capitalize on this because, like, people have a visceral reaction based on fear. And so the they're going to commercialize, whatever grabs you. And if fear is what grabs you, then you're going to get more stuff that plays on the fear. So, but I think we need to move beyond this, and it's really hard. It's arguably a very hard thing for the individual to do, and probably even harder for society. I think the American experiment, if you will, and the American dream of, like, you can achieve what you want, and we can have a pluralistic society where we allow everyone to do their thing, and it's going to collectively work out. I think this is a societal step in the right direction, but I think we really have to kind of get back to our roots in that regard, and stop being so angry and fearful, and just be a little bit more open and tolerant and understanding and positive, and have compassion for the people who are still ruled by fear, and try to gently encourage them to move in the other directions.
yeah, I love that. And it's definitely, as you say, not being it's not black and white, it's not good and evil. And also I mean, I was listening yesterday to a podcast where they were talking about how what you said about being positive, like hope. The definition of hope is having optimism with a plan. So it's being positive with a plan, and also recognizing, the challenges that will come along the way. Um, and yeah, so if we just try to actually start envisioning what a positive future could be like, do you have in your mind a vision of existential hope?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a rather extreme vision. People have even told me I should start a cult based on this, semi-seriously. And this is a vision that actually Allison also knows about, because we both encountered the Millennial Project and Marshall Savage, who's kind of disappeared, but we encountered it together. And that vision is like, we might be the only intelligent life in the universe. And that is not a stance that is popular with a lot of my space friends, but quite frankly, we have no evidence, no direct evidence of any other intelligent life or even any other life at this point in the universe. But I'm willing to grant that microbial life, or even just like simple, non-technological, non-civilizational life might be elsewhere in our galaxy. I think that the case is getting fairly tight right now, that there's no high-tech, at least no high-tech expansionist civilization in our galaxy, perhaps other galaxies. And so if you think about this, and I'm not saying this is true, I'm just saying it's worth thinking about. If you think that we are the universe's only experiment with intelligent, conscious life that's capable of love and appreciating beauty and searching for truth, because the rest of nature doesn't really do that. Okay, the rest of life, as far as we know, doesn't do that. If we're the only ones that do that in the whole galaxy or the whole universe, then what happens to us is like of extreme vital importance. You can't take this nihilistic view that a lot of our contemporaries do. They're like, oh, the world is headed to hell in a handbasket, but it doesn't really matter because there's a million technological civilizations. And so we're just a blip and who cares? I'm like, well, maybe not. Maybe we're the only game in town. It might be sort of a conservative, precautionary view to at least consider that and say that what matters to us matters fundamentally to the future of the universe. Is the universe going to be filled with life and intelligence and beauty and love and and understanding, or is it going to be a dead universe with just a bunch of like little bacteria living everywhere? To me, that makes all the difference in the world for the existential hope future. So my sort of vision of existential hope is that we should at least take this as a serious possibility and realize that we may have a absolutely fundamental responsibility, humans, to the future of the universe. We either spread life through the universe and spread all these wonderful aspects of our culture and our ecology. I mean, it either expands with us to fill a dead universe, or the universe remains dead. So that is a distinct possibility. I think it is the precautionary principle to take it quite seriously until we have incontrovertible evidence that it is untrue. And I think it's actually a better vision. What I mean is it's a more positive vision, because if we're just one little backwater third world civilization amongst the whole intergalactic federation, then it's like, well, something we might end up faring about as well as other backwater third world civilization societies do on Earth when they encounter the superior technology. It's like all kinds of things can go wrong, even if the more advanced cultures, have good intentions. It can still cause all sorts of problems for these lesser players. And so I'm kind of hoping we're not a lesser player. And I'm thinking the evidence is that we might be the only player. And so let's at least talk about and think about that potential future where we not only matter, we are fundamental.
Yeah, it sounds like sort of upgrading or upvaluing the humanity and the human experience,
Yes.
and potentially being like even more afraid of existential risks than we already are for this planet.
Well, again, but look, there's like, yes, you can make you even more afraid of existential risk, because like everything hangs in the balance based on what happens to us in this hypothesis. But it's also, you could look at it the other way. It's like the universe is ours, like, what do we want it to be?
Yeah, I interpret you as being very like optimistic and positive about the future. Would you say that you are? And if so, what would you say has like given you that strength or power?
Well, I have an optimistic, positive vision of how it can be. And I think if we, straighten out our attitude and certain other things, it will be that way. And I'm kind of wired to be optimistic. I'm not a very depressed person, although, I have my moments. But and this wiring, by the way, this is kind of why I'm so obsessed with how individuals think and and how they feel, and whether they're ruled by fear or ruled by vision and hope. Because really, like it has to start there. We're not gonna have this great future if everyone is, depressed and pessimistic and fearful. So let's work on that. Uh, I mean, I get, again, like, there's questions about technology and breakthroughs and stuff like this. I'm like, well, technological breakthroughs are probably going to still happen, and I don't know which ones are going to happen and when. But I'm kind of, thinking that as long as, things don't go totally off the rails, like we can count on technological advances and even some breakthroughs. But if we don't have a breakthrough in our wisdom and our thinking and our vision, then the technology is neutral. Like it's just going to make, like, look at AI, it could make the world this way or that way, or make or no difference. It's up to us. It's not the technology.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what I think the Existential Hope project is about in terms of, um, envisioning the path, but also being aware of the risks.
I would
Um,
like to mention one technology, and I know that I kind of people hear this a lot from me, but just in case, I do think that an amazing thing that we can use to make the earth a much better place is regenerative agriculture and regenerative aquaculture. Those things can really solve a whole interlocking set of problems: ecology, pollution, climate change, nutrition, human health, biodiversity, the oceans. It's a big topic, and it's a topic for another day, but regenerative agriculture is, from my mind, the most interesting quote unquote new technology that I've found out about recently. A lot of it is not very new. Some of it is, but it's getting really hot. And I've even done some projects with Foresight on this. It's really, really cool.
I think it would be interesting to hear more on it if you want to talk about it for a few minutes, and also any potential risks you see with it would be interesting to hear.
Well, unfortunately, a few minutes is really not enough time. But I will say the risks. I don't think there's risks in terms of like catastrophic risks that it's going to get out of control or something like that. It's a natural process, and the Earth has been sort of doing it in a way, not agriculture, but it's like this is just, again, looking at nature and finding out what works really well and what we can use. But and the risks are more like risks that we're going to not risks that it's going to not happen. um, yeah, I preferred to schedule a separate regenerative agriculture session, but dive down that rabbit hole right now because our time is.
Yeah, that sounds fair enough. Um, so I'll do a bit of a turn then and just ask you instead about um, we're imagining someone, young and new coming into the field that you're working in, so the space field. Is there anything in particular that you would recommend that they read? And it could be like a sci-fi, or could be nonfiction, or movies, anything that has really like inspired you
Uh,
on the
mm,
trajectory that you are. Um,
I mean, there's classic sci-fi and films, and I have some lists I can post in the notes about this. I've made lists of what I think are the best sci-fi and best sort of sci-fi films that tend to be on the more inspirational side, or at least the deeper side, rather than just like Star Wars and stuff like that. Um, but I think that in terms of nonfiction, if you're really interested in space, Scott Manley's video podcasts are really good. They're hardcore space, but I forget what the name of his podcast is. But his name is Scott Manley, and he's done many, many, many on all sorts of things about rockets and space and all this. I think that in terms of the general sort of technical and scientific X-Hope oriented stuff, I really recommend Lex Friedman's podcast. I know it's a time investment, but it's so good. He gets the best people, and he's doing really like the best interview here. And then there's some others. Sociologically, I really like Glenn Lowry, but that's a little bit more political. So yeah, those are some things I recommend. And, from those jumping off points, you can find all sorts of other.
I think those sounds like great recommendations, and I would love to maybe be able to share your list of recommended
Sure.
reading.
Sure. I'll send them right after the talk.
Perfect. So last question that I wanted to ask was, again, imagining this young person wanting to improve the world and getting into your field. Is there, wanting to improve the future, is there anything that you would recommend them specializing in? Is it regenerative agriculture or
Well,
something?
yeah, I mean, that's not really my field because that's just sort of an interest of mine, but there is a very interesting overlap between regenerative agriculture and satellites and remote sensing of the earth. And so I am currently trying to sort of pivot some of my work into that direction because I believe Planet Labs and other space activities, particularly remote sensing, can really be one of the many technologies that allows us to operationalize and scale and sort of make this precise, beautiful blend of ancient wisdom and modern technology. So um, I tend, to bring everything back to regenerative ag these days, just because that's kind of my one of my new passions. Uh, and AI and Internet of Things and collaboration technologies, all this stuff is important, particularly for agriculture. It's a natural fit. All kinds of sensing, not just from space, and all kinds of like smart devices. But again, not to replace nature, to leverage nature. Um, and another thing I just thought of is that if I was like a software person, like if you want to be a space person, you kind of have to study math, and then you have to study physics, and then you have to study some kind of engineering that's relevant, like aerospace engineering or electrical or mechanical. But if you're just like, if you just love to code and have really interesting challenges in that regard, I'd go work for Twitter. I think now is the golden opportunity. Like there's going to be some shifts at Twitter, and it could become the worldwide collaboration platform, at least at a certain level for idea, kind of free exchange of ideas. And I think that, it can be so much more than what it is. And that's a real interesting possibility for a software person. But I don't know what, I don't know what, just guess. Um, yeah. But if you just want to go the classic space route, it's kind of still a hard science thing. You study math, you study physics, then you study engineering, and then you try and get a job in the space industry, the general default pathway. Or you can also come at it through coding.
Yeah, I think just if I can sneak in one more question is like, I was thinking, we're getting a space person on the podcast that you would just be very talking about like venturing out there. Is that something that you think we should do, or where are you on this?
Well, I've never felt the call. I've never, even as a child, when I knew I wanted to like work at NASA or fantasize about it, I did not want to be an astronaut. There are others who feel quite differently, and kind of that's all they. Um, I don't know. Maybe I was a little too afraid, or I'm not quite sure why I was never called. I wanted to be one of those guys on the ground working on these complex systems, and so that's what I did. Um, I'm sorry. What was the question again?
Oh, the question I think was just if you think we should venture out. Um,
Oh, absolutely. We should venture out. It's the hero's journey
yeah,
to the extent that it exists in the modern world. I mean, it is the hero's journey. And by the way, that's a whole other rabbit hole, but it's like when we send robots into space to do science, and we, to a lesser extent, send people sometimes to do science, but it's really not sending people into space to do science or to do technology development or even for military purposes. Like, it's kind of BS. Like the money is, if you're just looking for the return on the dollars, like you can do a lot more science with robots. You can do a lot more technology development on the earth for the same amount of money. You can do, military doesn't really care about people in space. They did for a while, but it's like the mission's just not worth it, or if it's even there at all. And so all these people that get up there and try to justify like humans into space because of the spin-offs and stuff like that, I think they're being disingenuous. They're in the humans in space field because they're inspired by it, because of this exploratory drive and the hero's journey. They're not, and then they try and pretend like it's not a religious matter, but it's like an economic matter. And it doesn't, I don't think it holds up to careful scrutiny, but I'm not trying to say don't do it. I'm just saying, do it for the inspirational reasons. Now, on the other hand, like I did ask this, I went to these lectures once about the Mars rovers, the first set of advanced Mars rovers, the Mars Explorer rovers, which are, I think they're dead now, but they were up there for close to 10 years wandering around before the new ones got there. And this guy gave this great talk at NASA. It was the first I'd ever seen like this. He was a geologist, and he gave a talk about the first year of this rover's activities. Went here, and it took photographs of this, and then it saw this other thing in the distance, and then it went over there, and then it made some measurements, and it drilled a hole, and then it, found this other thing along the way, and then it looked at that, and he made this whole hour-long discussion of this rover's journey. I don't know how many, it was a few kilometers, and all these different things they figured out about the geology of Mars. And it was very impressive, right? Because this was all done, for, orders of magnitude less money and time than it would take to send humans to Mars. But I did ask him at the end of the talk, I was like, well, you're a geologist. You just described a year's worth of activity of this remotely operated rover on the surface of Mars doing geologist things, because this was kind of like a robot geologist. And I said to him, if you were there on Mars with your, your pickaxe and your magnifying glass and your collection bag, like how long would it have taken you to do all this stuff that the rover took a year? And he said, about 45 minutes. So there is sort of, I'm not going to completely denigrate the idea of humans doing science on other worlds, but it'll be wonderful, but I don't think it's a justifiable reason to spend the hundreds of billions of dollars to send people to these places. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Well, look, this is too much of a good opportunity for me to not just chime in with a few participant questions, because we actually had someone ask, what would you advise Elon Musk to do to actually make a self-sufficient Mars colony? And while you're at it, if you do want to talk a little bit about if O'Neill-style space colonies are likely and whether or not we can have Dyson swarms, please go for it. This is now a speculation zone out in space.
This is not really my passion. Of course, I've paid attention to it for many years. I don't think I can advise Elon Musk about colonizing Mars. I think he's thought about it much more deeply, and has obviously actually made it start to happen. So I really, and by the way, all I could advise him to do was what he did at the very beginning. I would have been like, talk to Robert Zubrin, because he understands what it's going to take to get started, and so that's exactly what Elon did. He met Zubrin, and I mean, he didn't hear this from me. I just found out later on that he had met Zubrin, and that's how he got super enthusiastic about the Mars mission stuff, was because he saw that there were actually architectures that closed, which is a technical aerospace term, meaning, you can design something that's capable of achieving the goal, and it comes in on budget and on schedule, the right mass, all this kind of stuff. So in terms of O'Neill colonies and Dyson spheres, I'm one of these people. I'm not really into like the moon versus Mars versus space colonies. I'm kind of like, do it all if you can. Like not necessarily Musk, but it's like, I don't think we know necessarily what the optimal path is right now. So in a way, maybe it's just we'll do the first one, or maybe we can do multiples. I mean, all these things are possible, and eventually they can certainly happen. Yeah. I'm not sure how much people are actually going to like this. You have to think about a colony on Mars, or even an orbital colony. Like a colony on Mars is going to make Burning Man look like luxury accommodations, right? It's going to be hard. It's going to be isolated. It's going to be dangerous. It's going to be boring, hostile, but still there are some people who are drawn to that. I'm not, people who go to Antarctica and stuff like that. That's what it's going to be like, but worse. And space colonies, it's going to be kind of like, I think, like living in a shopping mall or like a indoor condo complex at best. So again, it's not for me, but I think it's great. And like Dyson spheres, stuff like that, that's far future stuff. And they're, you're talking about like mega engineering. So all things are possible. Dyson spheres with regenerative agriculture, I could be into that. With herds of.
That's how they usually look like, right? Like,
Right.
So I have high hopes. It's at least aspirational already. And I should also say that for those of you who are interested in the space group now, Robert Zubrin will actually join us. I think he's next or the speaker after.
Yes.
To actually discuss Mars colonies. So that would be exciting.
Hey, Allison, are you going to ask me these bonus questions?
I will. I'm getting to it. Creon is interviewing himself. I'm not surprised. And you're actually doing a great job at this, which I think is so nice to also see in our space group. I really, really, really appreciate that. Especially, I think for those of you watching, like the interview between you and Adam Brown is a really, really fantastic one. It's really wonderful. And anyway, I'm getting off track again. Okay.
He's such a great person. I love that guy.
That is correct. We also had him for our Existential Hope podcast on, I think, 2 podcasts ago. And so that one will be out shortly as well. Okay, but you're bringing me back on track here. Thanks for that. We are trying to make this podcast really actionable in the sense that, we're A, trying to really inspire and uplift people, and then B, also give them like at least an avenue in which to channel their creative energies into. And so first, maybe we get back to the concept of a eucatastrophe. So when, the paper on existential hope from Toby Ord and Owen Cotton-Barron first came out, they really coined this term, or like they resurfaced the term of a eucatastrophe, which was actually Tolkien. But it was interesting because they were trying to come up with a term that is not a catastrophe, but like the opposite of a negative catastrophe, like a moment after which the expected value of the universe, or after which the future just looks much, much brighter. And so we want a better term for this. And we have a bounty out for this as well, for those of you who are listening. Creon, what's your best shot? What's a better word for eucatastrophe, which sounds so much like catastrophe?
Yeah. So I wrote a few things down here. I don't have the good ones. I'm not really that great at taglines. I think the future we want. I mean, if the eucatastrophe is the pivotal event, then I think a pivot is almost what we're talking about here in the language that I speak in terms of human growth. A pivot to the future we want. I don't know. Is there an opposite to the word apocalypse? Like, is there a pro-apocalypse?
Yes, I looked it up. Creation, genesis, and origination.
Yeah. Okay. But if we're looking like for the transition, I don't know, a pivot to the cosmic endowment, or a pivot to a flourishing universe. Or if we have an opposite, a single word that's the opposite of apocalypse, that would be a good word to come up with. That's all I got.
Okay, we have a great participant comment as well here from Joy on fantastrophe. So Joy, please.
Catastrophe. Oh, I love that. That's great.
Well, we have a Gitcoin bounty out there right now, I think, with many submissions already. I'm just finding a better term for this. So Joy, please apply to this, and anyone else who's hearing this, if they're still out by the time that this is airing. Okay, good. We'll continue to moan and just time out this a bit. And second question that we always ask, which is, I think, the one that like really is my favorite question. So I'm always so excited to ask it, which is, what would be such a eucatastrophic event for you? And so the idea is really,
right. Okay.
But wait, let me just set the stage for those people that are listening in. And so the idea is that, hey, look, let's try to actually imagine what such a great event would look like, the opposite of a catastrophe, like after an event after which the value of the universe would be much larger. The reason why we're asking is that we will then use that as a prompt, and again with a bounty, so that other people can generate a day in a life story about this. And we'll also create an art piece that really visualizes this type of event, and that we will then exhibit in our Existential Hope gallery. So the stage is yours, Creon. Give us your best shot at a eucatastrophic moment.
This was a question that I really felt a little bit of ill prepared for, but I do have some ideas. So I think one very interesting thing is that several of, like you and I, Allison, Beatrice, and maybe some others in this call who've, who've, we have had some experiences over the last few years that are really, I feel, sort of examples, like community gatherings and stuff like that, that are examples of what everybody could actually have in a fantastic future. And so I think that to some extent, maybe this is my own filter bubble here, but to some extent, things are already pivoting towards the kinds of future we could have in terms of love and community and technology and, you know, adventure, but also like lack of severe hardship and lack of fear. So I think that to some extent, our community, and maybe even to some extent, it's less obvious, the world is pivoting in this direction. You know, I'm sort of a Steven Pinker fan, and I think that things are getting better. And while we have risks, things are getting better for most people, in spite of what a lot of our contemporaries, you know, are so concerned with. And I'm not to say their concerns are invalid. I'm just saying it's a matter of where you focus, you know, what you want or what you love or what you hate. But but you know, like look at this recent war in Ukraine. Yes, of course, there's been suffering and of course there's danger, but it's kind of making a point like, hey, this is a terrible idea to go invading another country. Like these days, it does not work out well. You know, one could. So I think they are hopeful signs that the planet may actually be saying, hey, you know, we have it pretty good. Like, leave us alone, or just like collaborate with us, but don't fight because the aggressor, uh, what's in it for them, really? It's not clear that anything is. And so again, you know, uh, I'm happy with what I'm seeing, but maybe I would see the world through rose-colored glasses. But those are the glasses I want to see it through. So let's just leave it at that. Um, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's, to concretize it a little bit and actually like make it something that, people can really like imagine and pinpoint like a storyline on, or like, even like an art piece for. I'm hearing a lot of like, I guess at least in the beginning of it, like community and like types of specific like gatherings really in community that make one see that like more is possible, and why even we want longer lives for ourselves and for civilization. Like those kind of like pivotal breakthrough community moments. Is that something like that, or is there like a different thread you want to pull on?
No, I think that's more your thread, Allison, and I'm totally behind it, and I love it. It's just that's, you know, my way of thinking is more like, and maybe this is just like fantasy land. I don't know. I don't think so. My way of thinking is more like yes, people have to fall in love with their lives and in love with their fellow humans and in love with their civilization and the future. And, on the one hand, some might say, oh, well, you're proposing a change in human nature, and that has never happened and it's never going to happen. But I'm not so sure. I think humans are changing globally, not everywhere, not all at once, and not uniformly, but in a positive direction. But I think, we are, like, all these things that used to be so commonplace, like slavery and brutal hand-to-hand combat and warfare. I think these things are all, you know, anomalies now, and they're on the way out, I think. So yeah, I think that a pivot of humanity based on a pivot at the individual level is the event that's necessary and sufficient to make this happen, quite frankly. Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's not even like all that rosy, to the extent that, and like this is, I guess, also a plug for the book on gaming the future technologies for intelligent volunteer cooperation that like Mark and Christine and I just wrote. But like, I think really like we've made it so far as a civilization, and what you mentioned up front of just like, we've made it far enough that aggression is really not like such a good strategy anymore right now, right? Like you can either have like voluntary independence and leave each other alone,
Right.
or you can cooperate and collaborate.
Or you can compete within sort of a lawful, orderly playing field. And even that is becoming more like interdependence and this kind of thing. So we've been learning a lot the last few years, and I think we're going to continue to learn at a rapid rate. And I think, again, for all of its, for all the malignment that it gets, including from me, media and social media make it clear to the world, or much of the world, that like, uh, certain formally unquestioned ideas about war and these sorts of things are deserve a reexamination and rethinking, and it's happening. Hey, so I have the last thing on the list, right? Was
Yeah.
the advice question.
Yes, Creon, would you like to, well, first I want to say, I think like just to the competition point, I think one thing that we had also observed in the book is that competition often is just competing and collaborating or cooperating better with others. And so to some extent, we're competing on cooperation terms often, right? That is often what we're doing. And
It's
if we get better at cooperating, that's a pretty good driver, I think. That just to table the cooperation discussion. But that's, I think, will make for a few wonderful problems. So now, 2 more minutes. What is the best advice you ever got?
Okay.
How can others benefit from it?
I got 4 pieces of advice that stick out in my mind. I've gotten much, but I'm going to just mention them. When I was a kid, I was fortunate enough to be tutored by this famous astronomer named Bart Bach. And his advice to me as a young student was first study mathematics, then study physics, and then study astronomy, because I was interested in astronomy. So I didn't exactly go into astronomy, but that's kind of what I did. So thank you, late Bart Bach. Then the next piece of advice is from the spiritual teacher named Abraham Hicks. Carefully look into how you feel inside when considering various plans, events, and actions. Then pursue what makes you feel good. So you look how you feel, and if something makes you feel good, you move towards doing that, or you move towards appreciating that. And if it makes you not feel good, you recognize that it's not the direction you want to go, and you try to move your mind and heart in directions that do make you feel good. So that's really important. Then Sadhguru, who I've been listening to recently, had this thing that said, he was talking about like how to think and how to navigate the world. And he said, and he's this Indian guru, right? And he said, I'm not teaching you a religion. I'm not teaching you a philosophy. I'm teaching you a technology about how to be the CEO of your own mind. And so this is sort of another version of the same thing. And then the last piece of advice that I'm really glad I got was when I ran into my friend Luke Davis a number of years ago, I don't know, 6 to 7 years ago. And he said to me, Creon, you have to come to this event tonight and meet my friend Allison. You will love each other.
Oh man, okay. Mic drop, very, very emulatable. Thanks, Creon. Thanks everyone for joining. This was really, really wonderful. We hit it right on the hour. And I think Christine said it in the chat, we have to do these more with you than just once. So you have to come back annually now. And there's always like lots to learn. All right, everyone. This was a really, really hopeful session. I always leave like I think I would say is my eucatastrophe moment is having conversations like this and having like podcasts like this. Like even if they're virtual at Vision Weekend, like I always leave like insanely inspired afterwards. So thanks a lot for this eucatastrophic moment, guys. And we can't wait for the next one. Those are monthly. Thank you, Creon. This was wonderful. Thanks for preparing so much. And I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day and weekend. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.